Berlin, 1938. A glittering dinner at a grand mansion turns deadly when industrialist Gustav von Schröder collapses, poisoned by cyanide. Hercule Poirot, the master detective, steps into a web of secrets, blackmail, espionage, and betrayal. Among the guests, an aloof wife, a nervous chemist, a cunning actress, a guarded diplomat, a haunted émigré, and a defiant journalist. One is a murderer. As Poirot unravels their hidden motives, a single moment of distraction during a toast reveals the killer's hand. Can he expose the truth before the shadows of Berlin claim another life? Chapter 1. The Invitation. In the waning days of October 1938, Hercule Poirot found himself in Berlin, a city where the air carried the weight of whispered fears and the streets pulsed with a brittle energy. The leaves of Unter den Linden had turned a somber gold, and the clatter of trams mingled with the low hum of conversations that halted when strangers passed too near. Poirot, clad in a meticulously tailored overcoat, his mustache waxed to perfection, had arrived not for pleasure, but at the behest of an enigmatic invitation. It had come in an envelope of cream linen, sealed with crimson wax, and penned in a hand both elegant and commanding. Herr Gustav von Schröder, an industrialist of considerable wealth and influence, requested Poirot's presence at a private dinner at his Berlin residence. An evening of singular importance, the note promised, with no further explanation. Poirot's grey cells, ever alert to the scent of intrigue, stirred restlessly. Such invitations, he knew, were rarely without purpose. The von Schröder mansion loomed grandly on Unter den Linden, its Baroque facade a testament to old Prussian opulence, its windows aglow with the flicker of gaslights against the gathering dusk. Poirot stepped from his hired car, his patent leather shoes gleaming, and paused to survey the scene. Other guests were arriving, their figures emerging from the evening mist like players in a carefully staged drama. First came Frau Elisabeth von Schröder, the host's wife, her tall frame swathed in a sable coat, her face a mask of cool detachment as she ascended the steps without a glance to those around her. Next, Dr. Karl Neumann, a chemist with a sallow complexion and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles, darted quick glances at the street as though expecting pursuit. Fräulein Clara Richter followed, a young actress whose auburn curls and radiant smile belied the sharp intelligence in her green eyes. Herr Wilhelm Brandt, a diplomat with a lean face and a posture rigid as steel, moved with the measured tread of a man accustomed to navigating treacherous waters. Baroness Irina Volkov, a Russian émigré, glided forward, her fur-trimmed gown whispering against the stone, her dark eyes carrying the weight of a past she did not share. Last to arrive, brushing rain from his overcoat, was Herr Friedrich Müller, a journalist whose broad shoulders and defiant jaw suggested a man unafraid of confrontation. Poirot adjusted his bow tie, a gesture as deliberate as it was habitual, and entered the mansion. The foyer was a marvel of marble and gilt, its chandelier casting prisms of light across a frescoed ceiling. A butler, Herr Kessler, a gaunt figure with deep-set eyes and a demeanor of quiet efficiency, took Poirot's hat and coat, murmuring a welcome in flawless German. The other guests were ushered into the dining room, where a table of polished mahogany stretched beneath a constellation of crystal. The air was heavy with the scent of beeswax and roses, the latter arranged in silver vases that caught the candlelight. Herr von Schröder awaited them, a robust man in his 50s, his hawkish nose and piercing blue eyes lending him the air of a predator cloaked in civility. His dinner jacket was impeccable, his smile broad, but not entirely warm. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, extending a hand, "your reputation precedes you. I am honored you could join us." His voice carried a faint Prussian accent, clipped and precise. Poirot inclined his head, his mustache twitching slightly. "Herr von Schröder, I am always intrigued by the company of those who seek my presence. I trust this evening will prove enlightening." The guests took their places, the seating arranged with evident care. Poirot found himself to the left of the Baroness Volkoff, whose delicate perfume contrasted with the tension in her posture. Elisabeth von Schröder sat to her husband's right, her expression unreadable. Clara Richter, opposite von Schröder, flashed a smile that did not reach her eyes. Dr. Neumann, beside her, fidgeted with his napkin, while Brandt, at the table's far end, surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. Mueller, near the door, slouched slightly, his eyes darting between his host and the other guests. Dinner commenced with a consommé, its golden clarity served in porcelain bowls, followed by roast pheasant accompanied by a Riesling that shimmered in the crystal glasses. The conversation at first was polite but strained, like a violin strung too tightly. Brandt spoke of trade agreements with a diplomat's vagueness, while Mueller countered with pointed questions about the Reich's ambitions, his tone edged with challenge. The Baroness deflected Neumann's inquiries about her life in St. Petersburg with practiced grace, her laugh a touch too bright. Clara Richter, meanwhile, regaled the table with tales of the Berlin stage, her voice lilting but her glances sharp, as though measuring each listener's reaction. Elisabeth von Schröder said little, her fork moving with mechanical precision. Poirot, silent, observed. He noted the flicker of Clara's smirk when von Schröder praised her latest performance. The way Elizabeth's lips tightened at her husband's laughter. Neumann's fingers trembled as he reached for his glass, and Brandt's cigarette case clicked open and shut with rhythmic unease. The Baroness's eyes met Poirot's once, fleetingly, and he sensed a plea buried beneath her composure. Mueller's pen, ever present, scratched notes on a small pad when he thought no one watched. As the dessert plates, tarte tatin with a dollop of cream, were cleared, von Schröder rose, his glass raised. "To truth," he said, his voice carrying an odd weight, as though the word held a private meaning. The guests echoed the toast, their glasses clinking in a chorus that masked the undercurrent of distrust. Von Schröder drank deeply, then paused, his face contorted, a gasp escaped his lips, and he crumpled to the floor, his glass shattering against the mahogany. A collective cry rose from the table, chairs scraping back, faces paling in the candlelight. Poirot was at his side in an instant, his small frame belying the authority in his movements. He knelt, his eyes scanning von Schröder's face, now ashen, lips faintly blue, a trace of foam at the corner of his mouth. A faint, bitter scent, like almonds, lingered in the air. "Mon Dieu," Poirot murmured. "Cyanide." He rose, his gaze sweeping the room, where the guests stood frozen, their eyes wide with shock. Or perhaps, he thought, with guilt. The game, as Poirot knew it must, had begun. Chapter 2. The Scene of the Crime. Hercule Poirot stood motionless beside the fallen form of Herr Gustav von Schröder, his keen eyes absorbing every detail of the dining room where chaos had erupted only moments before. The air, heavy with the scent of roast pheasant and spilled Riesling, now carried a sharper note, the bitter tang of cyanide. The guests, frozen in their shock, formed a tableau of horror around the mahogany table, their faces illuminated by the flickering chandelier. Poirot's voice, calm and commanding, cut through the stifled gasps. "Mesdames et messieurs, no one is to leave this room. A crime has been committed, and I, Hercule Poirot, will see that justice is served." Von Schroeder lay sprawled on the Persian rug, his robust frame unnaturally still, his hawkish features contorted in a final grimace. The bluish tinge on his lips and the faint froth at his mouth confirmed Poirot's diagnosis. He knelt, careful not to disturb the scene, and examined the shattered glass that had held von Schroeder's wine. Shards glinted in the candlelight, the liquid seeping into the intricate patterns of the rug. Poirot's nostrils twitched. The almond-like odor was unmistakable, though faint. He scanned the table. 6 other glasses stood intact, their contents undisturbed, each guest's place marked by a napkin folded with Prussian precision. Rising, Poirot turned to the butler, Herr Kessler, who hovered near the door, his gaunt face pale and his hands trembling. "Herr Kessler, summon the police at once. Ensure no one enters or exits this house until they arrive." The butler nodded, his eyes wide, and hurried from the room. Poirot's gaze returned to the guests, each a study in unease. Frau Elisabeth von Schroeder clutched the back of her chair, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. Dr. Karl Neumann adjusted his spectacles repeatedly, his breath uneven. Fräulein Clara Richter, the actress, pressed a hand to her lips, her eyes darting to the others. Herr Wilhelm Brandt, the diplomat, stood rigid, his cigarette case forgotten in his hand. Baroness Irina Volkov's fingers twisted a lace handkerchief, her composure fraying. Herr Friedrich Müller, the journalist, leaned against the wall, his defiant posture at odds with the pallor of his face. Poirot moved with deliberate care, his small frame exuding authority. He circled the table, noting the precise arrangement of the scene. The consommé bowls had been cleared, the pheasant plates removed, but the dessert course, tarte tatin, remained at some settings. Von Schroeder's place was marked by the chaos of his fall, his chair askew, his napkin crumpled, and a small glinting object half hidden beneath it. Poirot bent, his gloved fingers retrieving a tiny glass vial, no larger than a thimble, its stopper missing. He held it to the light, observing a trace of crystalline residue within. Without a word, he slipped it into his pocket, his expression unreadable. "Mes amis," he said, turning to the guests. "One of you has committed murder. The poison was administered here, in this room, during our meal. I will discover how and why." His tone was not accusatory, but certain, and the guests shifted uneasily under his scrutiny. Dr. Neumann cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. Could it not have been a heart attack? Herr von Schroeder was not young. Poirot's mustache twitched. "Non, monsieur. The symptoms, cyanide is unmistakable. The question is not what killed him, but who." He reconstructed the evening in his mind, his gray cells arranging the details like pieces of a mosaic. The toast, von Schroeder's last act, had been the pivotal moment. "To truth," he had said, raising his glass. All had followed, their glasses clinking in a fleeting moment of unity. Yet only von Schroeder's glass had been poisoned, its contents lethal. Poirot's eyes scanned the table again. The wine decanter, placed near the host's seat, was half full, its contents untainted, as the other guests showed no symptoms. The poison, then, had been in the glass itself, not the wine poured earlier. But how had it been placed there, under the watchful eyes of 7 others? Poirot summoned Kessler, who returned with news that the police were en route. "Tell me," Poirot said, his voice low but firm, "who handled the wine, the glasses, the service?" Kessler, wringing his hands, explained that the wine had been decanted that afternoon by the sommelier, a trusted servant who had since left for the evening. The glasses, polished to a gleam, had been set by the housemaid under Kessler's supervision. The food, consommé, pheasant, tarte, had been prepared by Frau Meller, the chef, whose loyalty to von Schröder spanned decades. No stranger had entered the dining room during the meal. The servants had withdrawn after serving the dessert. Poirot's attention returned to the seating arrangement, which he memorized with precision. Elisabeth von Schröder had sat to her husband's right, her proximity offering opportunity. Clara Richter, opposite, had leaned forward during the toast, her shawl brushing the table. Dr. Neumann, beside Clara, had fidgeted throughout, his hands often below the table. Wilhelm Brandt, at the far end, had seemed detached, yet his eyes missed nothing. Baroness Volkoff, to Poirot's left, had been closest to him, her movements graceful but restrained. Muller, near the door, had risen once to adjust his coat, his path taking him near von Schröder's chair. Each, Poirot noted, had been within reach of the fatal glass at some point. He approached the table again, examining the debris. The shattered glass offered no further clues, but the vial intrigued him. Its size suggested it had been concealed, perhaps in a sleeve, a pocket, or even a lady's handbag. Cyanide was not a common poison. Its procurement required knowledge and access. Poirot's thoughts turned to Dr. Neumann, the chemist, whose laboratory might yield such a substance. Yet the man's nervousness seemed genuine, not the calculated fear of a murderer. The guests, now seated in the drawing room at Poirot's insistence, whispered among themselves. Clara's laugh, brittle and forced, cut through the murmurs. "This is absurd," she said, her voice carrying the cadence of the stage. "Why would any of us do such a thing?" Poirot turned to her, his eyes piercing. "Mademoiselle, that is precisely what I intend to discover. Each of you had reason to be here, and each, perhaps, a reason to wish Herr von Schröder dead." He questioned Kessler further, away from the others. "Did you observe anything unusual during the meal?" The butler hesitated, then admitted that Fräulein Richter's shawl had caught on von Schröder's chair during the toast, causing a brief distraction as she apologized. "It was nothing," Kessler said. She laughed it off. Poirot's eyes narrowed. A distraction, however brief, was an opportunity. He recalled Clara's poise, the way her movements seemed rehearsed, as though every gesture were part of a performance. The distant wail of a siren announced the police's arrival. Poirot straightened, his mind racing. The vial, the toast, the shawl. Each was a thread in a tapestry of deceit. He would unravel it, he vowed, with the precision that had made his name synonymous with truth. As the drawing-room door opened to admit the authorities, Poirot's gray cells hummed, already weaving the fragments into a pattern only he could see. Chapter 3. The Guest's Secrets. The drawing room of the von Schröder mansion was a study in opulence. Its walls, adorned with gilded portraits and heavy velvet drapes that seemed to absorb the tension now crackling among the guests. A fire sputtered in the marble hearth, casting long shadows that danced across the faces of those gathered. Hercule Poirot stood at the room's center, his small, immaculate figure a beacon of calm amid the storm of unease. The police, led by Inspector Braun, a dour man with a mustache as stiff as his demeanor, had secured the dining room and were questioning the servants. Poirot, however, had insisted on speaking with the guests first. "The truth," he said, his voice clear and measured, "lies not only in the how of this crime, but in the why. And so, mesdames et messieurs, we begin." He surveyed the group, his green eyes sharp as they moved from one face to the next. Frau Elisabeth von Schröder sat erect in a high-backed chair, her sable stole draped over her shoulders like armor. Dr. Karl Neumann perched on the edge of a settee, his fingers twisting a handkerchief. Fräulein Clara Richter leaned against a pianoforte, her posture casual, but her eyes watchful. Herr Wilhelm Brandt stood by the window, his silhouette rigid against the rain-streaked glass. Baroness Irina Volkov occupied a corner, her delicate hands folded in her lap, though her knuckles betrayed her tension. Herr Friedrich Müller slouched in an armchair, his journalist's notebook open but untouched, his gaze defiant. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back. "Each of you was present when Herr von Schröder met his end. Each of you had opportunity. Now, I seek motive. Speak plainly, for deception will only delay the inevitable." His tone was not harsh, but carried the weight of certainty, as though he already glimpsed the threads of guilt woven among them. He began with Elisabeth von Schröder. "Madame, your husband was a man of influence, yet I sense all was not well between you." Elizabeth's lips tightened, her pale blue eyes meeting Poirot's without flinching. "Gustave was a difficult man," she said, her voice low and controlled. "His ambitions consumed him. Business, politics, art. Our marriage was an arrangement, nothing more. But I had no reason to kill him. His wealth was mine to share. His death leaves me nothing but scrutiny." Her words were steady, but Poirot noted the faint tremor in her hands, the way they smoothed her skirt as if to anchor her composure. Turning to Dr. Neumann, Poirot's gaze softened, though his scrutiny did not. "Monsieur le Docteur, you are a man of science. What was your connection to Herr von Schröder?" Neumann's spectacles glinted as he adjusted them, his voice faltering. He funded my research, chemical compounds for industrial use. We met only occasionally. I knew him as a patron, nothing more." His eyes darted to the floor, avoiding Poirot's piercing stare. Poirot made a mental note. Neumann's nervousness suggested more than professional ties, perhaps a fear of what von Schröder's patronage concealed. Fräulein Clara Richter was next, her auburn curls catching the firelight as she tilted her head with a performer's grace. "Mademoiselle, you are young, talented, yet I sense Herr von Schröder's interest in you was not purely artistic." Clara's laugh was light, almost mocking. "He was a patron of the theater, monsieur. He admired my performances, perhaps too ardently. Men like him often blur admiration with desire, but I am accustomed to such attentions." Her smile was a mask, and Poirot detected a flicker of disdain beneath it. Had von Schröder's attentions crossed a line? Her poise, he thought, was that of a woman skilled at concealing her true feelings. Herr Wilhelm Brandt, the diplomat, met Poirot's gaze with a cool detachment that bordered on arrogance. Herr Brandt, your presence here suggests matters of state. What dealings did you have with the deceased?" Brandt exhaled a thin stream of cigarette smoke, his voice measured. "Von Schroeder was a useful contact. We discussed trade, nothing more. His death is inconvenient, but I assure you, I had no hand in it." His words were smooth, too smooth, and Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his fingers lingered on the silver cigarette case. Diplomacy, Poirot mused, was often a veil for darker motives. Baroness Irina Volkov spoke softly, her Russian accent lending her words a melancholic cadence. "Madame, you are far from home. How did you come to know Herr von Schroeder?" Her dark eyes met his, and for a moment they held a depth of sorrow that startled him. "He was my savior," she said. "When I fled Russia, Gustav arranged my passage to Berlin. Without him, I would have perished." Her gratitude seemed genuine, yet Poirot sensed an undercurrent of fear, as though her debt to von Schroeder carried a heavier price than she admitted. Finally, Poirot turned to Herr Friedrich Müller, whose journalist's pen had stilled, though his eyes burned with intensity. "Herr Müller, you are a seeker of truths, yet your presence at this table suggests a personal stake. What was your quarrel with Herr von Schroeder?" Müller leaned forward, his voice rough. "He was a profiteer, monsieur, a man who grew fat on the Reich's machinations while others suffered. I was investigating his dealings, art, money, influence. He knew I was close to exposing him." His candor was bold, almost reckless, and Poirot wondered if it masked a deeper intent. The room fell silent, the crackle of the fire the only sound. Poirot paced slowly, his polished shoes silent on the thick carpet. "Each of you," he said, "has a secret, a reason to resent or fear Herr von Schroeder. But only one of you turned that resentment into murder." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "The poison was in his glass, placed there during the meal. I will discover who had the means and the nerve to act." Inspector Braun entered, his heavy boots thudding against the parquet. "Monsieur Poirot, the scene is secure. The vial you found is with our chemist for analysis." Poirot nodded, his mind already turning to the vial's implications. Cyanide was not a casual poison. It required access, knowledge, and intent. He glanced at Neumann, whose laboratory might hold such secrets, then at Clara, whose distraction during the toast lingered in his thoughts. Miller's boldness, Brandt's reserve, the Baroness's fear, Elizabeth's detachment, each was a piece of the puzzle, but the pattern remained elusive. "I will speak with each of you again," Poirot said, his voice firm. "For now, remain here. The truth, it hides, but not for long." As the guests exchanged uneasy glances, Poirot stepped toward the door, his gray cells alight with possibilities. The fire cast his shadow long and sharp, a silent promise that no secret would escape Hercule Poirot. Chapter 4. The Vial and the Past. The von Schroeder mansion seemed to hold its breath as the night deepened, the grandeur of its halls now cloaked in the somber weight of murder. Hercule Poirot stood in the study, a room of dark oak and leather-bound volumes, where the air carried the faint scent of cigar smoke and old paper. The police, under Inspector Braun's methodical direction, were combing the dining room for further evidence, but Poirot had requested access to Herr von Schroeder's private sanctum. Here, he believed, lay the secrets that had led to the fatal toast. His gray cells, ever restless, churned with the details of the evening, the shattered glass, the hidden vial, the guarded glances of the guests. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the edge of von Schroeder's desk, a massive piece inlaid with mother-of-pearl, cluttered with ledgers, art catalogs, and a silver inkstand. His eyes fell on a locked drawer, its brass keyhole gleaming faintly in the lamplight. He summoned Herr Kessler, the butler, whose gaunt frame appeared in the doorway, his eyes still wide with the shock of the evening. "Herr Kessler," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent. "The key to this drawer, if you please." Kessler hesitated, his hands fidgeting, then produced a small key from a chain within his waistcoat. "Herr von Schroeder was particular about his privacy," he murmured, as if apologizing for the intrusion. The drawer yielded its secrets reluctantly. A bundle of letters tied with a black ribbon, a ledger marked with cryptic notations, and a photograph of a younger von Schroeder with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Baroness Volkoff. Poirot untied the ribbon, his movements precise. The letters were a mix of languages, German, Russian, and one in French, each revealing fragments of von Schroeder's hidden life. One, penned in the Baroness's elegant script, spoke of debts repaid in full, and hinted at a service rendered under duress. Another, from Herr Müller, was a draft of a letter threatening to expose von Schroeder's illicit dealings in art and currency. A third, unsigned but in a hurried scrawl, mentioned the package delivered to Vienna. Poirot's mustache twitched. These were not mere correspondences, but threads in a web of intrigue. He turned to the vial, now in the hands of Inspector Braun's chemist, though Poirot needed no analysis to confirm its contents. "Cyanide," he mused aloud, "is a poison of intention. It is not stumbled upon, it is sought." He recalled Dr. Neumann's nervous demeanor and his claim of limited ties to von Schroeder. A chemist, Poirot reasoned, would have access to such substances, yet Neumann's fear seemed too raw to be that of a calculated killer. Still, the possibility could not be dismissed. Poirot sought out Baroness Volkoff, finding her alone in the drawing room, her silhouette framed against the fire's dying embers. "Madame," he began, his tone gentle yet probing, "your letter to Herr von Schroeder speaks of debts. What hold did he have over you?" The Baroness's hands trembled, her lace handkerchief twisting in her fingers. "He saved me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "When I fled Russia, Gustav arranged my escape, papers, passage, safety, but his kindness came with a price. He asked me to observe certain émigré circles, to report their activities." Her eyes met Poirot's, pleading. "I had no choice, monsieur. My family remains in danger." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. Blackmail, he thought, was a motive as old as crime itself. But was it enough to drive the Baroness to murder? He returned to the study, where Inspector Braun awaited him. "The vial contained cyanide, as you suspected," Braun said, his voice gruff. "No fingerprints, though it was wiped clean." Poirot's eyes narrowed. A careful murderer then, but not infallible. He questioned Kessler further, probing the butler's memory of the dinner's preparations. The glasses, Kessler confirmed, had been set hours before, untouched until the meal began. The wine decanter, filled by the sommelier, had been placed on a sideboard, accessible to anyone who passed through the dining room. Poirot's mind flashed to Müller, who had arrived late, his coat damp with rain. Had he lingered near the table before joining the others? Poirot reconstructed the fatal moment in his mind. The toast to truth had been von Schroeder's final act. The guests had raised their glasses, their movements a blur of etiquette and tension. Clara Richter's shawl had caught on von Schroeder's chair, a fleeting distraction that Kessler had dismissed as accidental. But Poirot, ever attuned to the choreography of human behavior, suspected otherwise. Clara's poise, her actress's grace, suggested a woman capable of turning a moment's chaos to her advantage. He sought out Dr. Neumann next, finding him in the library, his sallow face illuminated by a single lamp. "Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot said, "your laboratory, does it contain substances such as cyanide?" Neumann's hands shook as he adjusted his spectacles. "My work involves chemicals, yes, but nothing so deadly. I swear it, monsieur." His voice cracked, and Poirot noted the sweat beading on his brow. "And yet," Poirot pressed, "Herr von Schroeder funded your research. Did he ever visit your laboratory?" Neumann hesitated, then admitted, "Once or twice. He was curious about my progress." Poirot filed this away. Curiosity could mask darker intentions. The ledger from the drawer proved another clue. Its pages detailed transactions, art purchases, wire transfers to Swiss accounts, and payments to unnamed parties. One entry, dated a month prior, noted a consultation with Brandt, the diplomat. Poirot's gray cells hummed. Brandt's claim of mere trade discussions now seemed thin, a veneer over dealings that might involve espionage, or worse. As the clock struck midnight, Poirot stood alone in the study, the letters spread before him. Each guest, he realized, was entangled in von Schroeder's schemes, blackmail, profiteering, perhaps treason. The vial, wiped clean, suggested a murderer who planned meticulously, yet acted in haste. Clara's shawl, Müller's late arrival, Neumann's laboratory, the Baroness's secrets, Brandt's reserve, Elizabeth's detachment. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the picture remained incomplete. He stepped into the hall where the guests waited under Inspector Braun's watchful eye. "Mes amis," he said, his voice carrying a quiet authority. "The truth is a delicate thing, but it cannot hide from Hercule Poirot. Tomorrow we will speak again." As he adjusted his coat and prepared to retire, the mansion's shadows seemed to whisper, urging him to unravel the mystery before another act of violence darkened its halls. Chapter 5. The Actress and the Diplomat. The von Schroeder mansion, its opulent halls now steeped in the chill of suspicion, seemed to close in around Hercule Poirot as he pursued the threads of the murder. The study, with its secrets laid bare, had offered tantalizing clues, but the truth remained elusive, a shadow flitting just beyond his grasp. The night had grown late, the clock's chimes echoing through the silent corridors, yet Poirot's gray cells were alight, piecing together the mosaic of motives and opportunities. He turned his attention to two figures whose guarded demeanors intrigued him most. Fräulein Clara Richter, the actress whose charm masked calculation, and Herr Wilhelm Brandt, the diplomat whose reserve hinted at deeper machinations. Poirot found Clara in the conservatory, a glass-walled sanctuary filled with ferns and the faint scent of damp earth. She stood by a potted orchid, her auburn curls catching the moonlight that streamed through the panes. Her posture was relaxed, almost defiant, as though she were playing a role for an unseen audience. "Mademoiselle Richter," Poirot began, his voice soft but piercing, "your presence at this dinner was no accident. Herr von Schroeder admired you, yes, but I suspect his interest was more than artistic. What hold did he have over you?" Clara's lips curved into a smile, her green eyes meeting his with a spark of defiance. "You are perceptive, Monsieur Poirot. Gustave was generous. He promised to elevate my career, roles in Berlin's finest theaters, introductions to influential men. But such promises come with expectations." She paused, her fingers brushing the orchid's delicate petals. "He was possessive, insistent. I indulged him, but only to a point." Her tone was light, yet Poirot detected a steel beneath it, a woman accustomed to navigating the desires of powerful men without losing her own agency. "Did you resent him for it?" Poirot pressed. Clara laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Resent? Perhaps. But kill? That's a role I've never played." Poirot noted her composure, the way her hands remained steady despite the weight of his questions. He recalled Kessler's account of her shawl catching on von Schroeder's chair during the toast, a moment of chaos that had drawn all eyes. "Your shawl, mademoiselle," he said. "It was no mere accident, I think." Clara's smile faltered, but only for an instant. "A clumsy moment, nothing more. The wine made me careless." Her explanation was smooth, but Poirot's gray cells stirred. An actress of her caliber, he reasoned, did not stumble without purpose. Leaving Clara, Poirot sought out Wilhelm Brandt, who stood alone on the mansion's terrace, the glow of his cigarette a lone beacon in the darkness. The rain had ceased, leaving the air crisp and heavy, with the scent of wet stone. Brandt's lean face was impassive, his eyes fixed on the distant lights of Berlin. "Herr Brandt," Poirot said, stepping into the cool night, "your dealings with Herr von Schroeder were, you say, matters of trade. Yet I find this difficult to believe. A man of your position does not dine with an industrialist for mere commerce." Brandt exhaled a plume of smoke, his voice measured. "You overcomplicate things, Monsieur Poirot. Gustave was a useful contact. Art, industry, connections. My work requires such alliances." His words were precise, but Poirot noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tightened around the cigarette case. "And yet," Poirot countered, "the ledger in his study speaks of a consultation with you, dated weeks ago. Not trade, I think, but something more delicate." Brandt's eyes flickered, a momentary crack in his diplomatic armor. "You've been thorough," he said, his tone clipped. Von Schroeder was reckless, dabbling in matters beyond his understanding. "I advised caution, nothing more." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Arms deals, perhaps, or espionage." Brandt's world was one of shadows, and von Schroeder had been a player in it. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot summoned Herr Kessler once more. The butler, his face etched with fatigue, stood rigid as Poirot questioned him about Clara's visits to the mansion. "Fräulein Richter came often," Kessler admitted, his voice low. "Late evenings, sometimes after the theater. Herr von Schroeder called them consultations, but—" He trailed off, his loyalty warring with truth. Poirot pressed gently. "And what did you observe, Herr Kessler?" The butler hesitated, then said, "She was charming, but guarded. Once I overheard an argument. Herr von Schroeder was angry, accusing her of disloyalty." Poirot's eyes gleamed. A lover's quarrel, perhaps, or something more sinister. He turned his thoughts to the mechanics of the crime. The cyanide had been in von Schroeder's glass, not the decanter, as the other guests were unaffected. The vial, wiped clean, suggested premeditation, yet the act itself required boldness. To place the poison under the eyes of a full table. Clara's shawl, Müller's late arrival, Neumann's laboratory access, each offered a piece of the puzzle, but Brandt's reticence intrigued him. Had the diplomat's consultations with von Schroeder crossed into dangerous territory? Poirot recalled the ledger's mention of Vienna, a city synonymous with intrigue in these tense times. Brandt's diplomatic immunity, he mused, made him untouchable, but not above suspicion. Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room, the fire now reduced to glowing embers. "Mes amis," he said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. The poison was placed during the toast, a moment of distraction. One of you seized it with the precision of a conjurer. His eyes lingered on Clara, whose smile was a mask, then on Brandt, whose cigarette glowed faintly in the dim light. Herr von Schroeder was a man of secrets, art, money, power. Those secrets cost him his life. I will uncover them, and the murderer who hides among you. Inspector Brown approached, his expression grim. The servants confirm no one entered the dining room after the meal began, except the guests and Kessler. Poirot nodded, his mind racing. The shawl, the vial, the ledger, each pointed to a calculated act, yet the motive remained murky. Clara's ambition, Brandt's secrecy, or perhaps another's desperation. He dismissed the guests, noting their uneasy glances, and retired to his room, where the silence of the mansion pressed against him. The truth, he knew, was close, but it required one final spark to illuminate the darkness. Chapter 6. The Journalist's Gambit. The von Schroeder mansion, its grandeur now dimmed by the specter of murder, seemed to pulse with unspoken truths as the night wore on. Hercule Poirot, his mind a whirl of deductions, stood in the library, where the scent of aged leather and wax polish mingled with the faint chill of the Berlin air, seeping through a cracked window. The clues, the vial, the ledger, the shawl, had begun to form a pattern, but one figure drew his focus. Herr Friedrich Müller, the journalist whose bold defiance and probing pen suggested a man unafraid to challenge the powerful. Poirot's gray cells hummed. Müller's exposé, he suspected, was the key to unlocking the motive behind von Schroeder's death. Poirot found Müller in the billiard room, leaning against the green baize table, his notebook open, but his pen idle. The journalist's broad shoulders and unshaven jaw gave him a rough-hewn air, but his eyes burned with a restless intensity. "Herr Müller," Poirot began, his voice calm yet incisive, "you have made no secret of your contempt for Herr von Schroeder. Your exposé, I understand, threatened to lay bare his dealings. Tell me, what did you uncover that made him so dangerous?" Müller straightened, his lips curling into a wry smile. "You're a sharp one, Monsieur Poirot. Von Schroeder was no mere industrialist. His art collection, paintings, sculptures, rare manuscripts, was a front. He smuggled money, gold, even secrets through those deals. Half his wealth came from cozying up to the Reich's elite, the other half from backroom trades with foreign buyers." He tapped his notebook. "I had proof, letters, bank records, a witness in Vienna. He knew I was close to publishing." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And yet you dined at his table. A bold move, or a reckless one?" Müller shrugged, his defiance unshaken. "I needed one last piece, confirmation of a deal with a Swiss banker. I slipped into the dining room before dinner, hid a listening device under the table. Thought I might catch him boasting." Poirot's mustache twitched. "You entered alone, before the others. Time enough, perhaps, to tamper with a glass." Müller's smile faded, his voice sharp. "I'm no murderer, Poirot. I wanted him exposed, not dead. A live villain makes a better story." Poirot paced, his polished shoes silent on the parquet. Müller's admission placed him near the crime scene before the meal, a critical moment. The cyanide, Poirot reasoned, had been placed in von Schroeder's glass, not the decanter, requiring access to the dining room. Müller's boldness, his willingness to infiltrate, made him a plausible suspect. Yet his motive, public exposure, seemed at odds with the secrecy of poison. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot summoned Herr Kessler, whose gaunt face betrayed the strain of the night. "Herr Kessler, you saw Herr Müller arrive late. Did he linger in the dining room before joining us?" The butler hesitated, his eyes darting to Müller, who stood nearby. He was in the foyer, adjusting his coat. I didn't see him enter the dining room, but I was busy with the other guests." Poirot nodded, filing away the ambiguity. Müller's opportunity was clear, but opportunity alone was not proof. Poirot's thoughts returned to Clara Richter's shawl, the distraction during the toast. He sought her out, finding her in the conservatory, her silhouette framed by moonlight. "Mademoiselle," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Your shawl caught Herr von Schroeder's chair, drawing all eyes. A convenient moment, perhaps, for a sleight of hand." Clara's laugh was sharp, her eyes flashing. "You think me a magician, monsieur? I'm an actress, not a poisoner. The shawl was an accident, nothing more." But Poirot noted the slight tremor in her voice, the way her fingers tightened on her cigarette holder. Her denial, he thought, was too polished, like a line rehearsed for the stage. He turned his attention to the vial, now confirmed as cyanide by Inspector Braun's chemist. Its absence of fingerprints suggested a careful hand, yet its presence under the napkin hinted at haste. Poirot reconstructed the toast in his mind: von Schroeder's raised glass, the clink of crystal, Clara's shawl, Müller's proximity to the door. The poison had been fast-acting, requiring precise timing. Clara's distraction, he suspected, was no accident, but Müller's earlier access to the dining room could not be ignored. Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing room, the fire now a faint glow. "Mes amis," he said, his voice commanding silence. The murder was a calculated act, yet it required audacity. The poison was placed during the toast, or perhaps before, by one who knew Herr von Schroeder's habits. His eyes swept the room, lingering on Müller, then Clara. "Herr Müller, you sought to ruin him with words. Mademoiselle Richter, your charm concealed a deeper grievance. One of you acted, and I will know who." Inspector Braun, hovering nearby, reported that the servants had found no trace of cyanide in the kitchen or cellars. "The poison came from outside," he said. Poirot's thoughts turned to Dr. Neumann's laboratory, but the chemist's fear seemed genuine, not the guilt of a killer. Still, Clara's frequent visits to von Schroeder's circle raised questions. Had she access to Neumann's lab, perhaps under pretense? As the guests dispersed, Poirot lingered, his mind tracing the threads. Müller's exposé, Clara's shawl, the vial's residue, each pointed to a truth just out of reach. He stepped into the hall, where the mansion's shadows seemed to whisper of betrayal. The journalist's gambit, he mused, had provoked von Schroeder, but was it enough to kill? Or had Clara's calculated charm masked a deadlier intent? The answer, Poirot knew, lay in the final act, and he would not rest until it was revealed. Chapter 7. The Final Revelation. The von Schroeder mansion, its once vibrant halls now shrouded in the pall of murder, seemed to hold its secrets tightly as the first light of dawn crept through the heavy drapes. Hercule Poirot stood in the dining room, where the tragedy had unfolded mere hours before. His small frame silhouetted against the polished mahogany table. The air still carried the faint tang of spilled wine, though the shattered glass and Herr von Schroeder's body had been removed by Inspector Brown's men. Poirot's grey cells, tireless and precise, had woven the threads of the case: Clara's shawl, Miller's exposé, the cyanide vial, the ledger's secrets, into a tapestry that now demanded its final unveiling. The truth, he knew, was no longer a shadow, but a figure ready to step into the light. He had requested the guests gather once more in the dining room, recreating the scene of the fatal toast. The table was reset, glasses gleaming under the chandelier, though the absence of von Schroeder's commanding presence left an eerie void. Frau Elisabeth von Schroeder sat rigidly, her face a mask of controlled grief. Dr. Karl Neumann fidgeted, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Fräulein Clara Richter stood by her chair, her actress's poise unshaken, but her eyes wary. Herr Wilhelm Brandt leaned against the wall, his cigarette unlit, his gaze guarded. Baroness Irina Volkov clutched a shawl, her dark eyes haunted. Herr Friedrich Müller, notebook in hand, watched Poirot with a mix of curiosity and defiance. Inspector Brown stood by the door, his dour expression softened by anticipation. Poirot held up a replica of the vial, its glass catching the candlelight. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice steady as a metronome. "This vial, found beneath a napkin, held the cyanide that killed Herr von Schroeder. It was placed with care, yet left behind in haste. The poison was in his glass, administered during the toast. A moment of chaos seized by a murderer among you." He paced slowly, his eyes sweeping the room. Herr von Schroeder was a man of secrets, blackmail, espionage, profiteering. Each of you had reason to fear or despise him, but only one acted. He turned to Elisabeth von Schroeder. "Madame, your marriage was cold, a contract strained by his indiscretions. You knew of his affairs, his schemes, yet you remained silent. Resentment, perhaps, but not murder." Elizabeth's lips parted, but she said nothing, her hands steady now. To Dr. Neumann, he said, "Monsieur, your laboratory offered access to cyanide, yet your fear is that of a man caught in another's web, not a killer." Neumann exhaled, his relief palpable. Poirot's gaze shifted to Baroness Volkov. "Madame, you were blackmailed, your gratitude to von Schroeder twisted into betrayal. But your fear was of exposure, not of blood." The Baroness's eyes glistened, but she nodded faintly. He faced Müller. "Herr Müller, your exposé threatened von Schroeder's empire. You entered the dining room early, perhaps to plant your device, perhaps to tamper. Yet your weapon is the pen, not poison." Müller's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. Poirot's eyes settled on Clara Richter. "Mademoiselle, you are the key. Your shawl, catching on Herr von Schroeder's chair, was no accident. It was a distraction, perfectly timed, allowing you to slip the cyanide from this vial into his glass." Clara's laugh was sharp, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of panic. "Absurd, monsieur. I'm no chemist, no poisoner." Poirot raised a hand, silencing her. "You were his lover, yes, but also his victim. Herr von Schroeder promised you fame, yet demanded your loyalty, perhaps more. When you resisted, he threatened to ruin you, to expose your past. You visited Dr. Neumann's laboratory under pretense of curiosity and procured the cyanide. The toast was your moment, your shawl the curtain that hid your act. Clara's composure cracked, her voice rising. He was a monster. He used me, humiliated me, threatened to destroy my career. She clutched the table, her knuckles white. I took the cyanide. Yes, from Neumann's lab. I couldn't let him ruin me. The room gasped, but Poirot remained unmoved. He turned to Inspector Braun. Mademoiselle Richter is your murderer. The vial, the shawl, her access to the poison, all confirm it. Braun stepped forward, his men moving to restrain Clara, who stood defiant, her eyes blazing. "You've no proof," she cried, but her voice faltered as Braun produced the vial, its residue now linked to Neumann's laboratory. Poirot addressed the others. "You are not innocent, Madame von Schroeder. You ignored his cruelty. Baroness, you hid his blackmail. Herr Müller, your exposé provoked his recklessness. Herr Brandt, your dealings in Vienna were no mere trade. Dr. Neumann, your negligence allowed the poison's theft, yet only Mademoiselle Richter acted." As Clara was led away, her defiance giving way to a bitter sob, the guests dispersed, their secrets laid bare. Poirot adjusted his hat, his expression somber. The truth had prevailed, but the mansion's shadows lingered, a reminder of the cost of ambition and betrayal. He stepped into the Berlin dawn, the city's tensions mirroring the unease in his heart. The case was closed, but the gray cells, ever vigilant, knew that truth was a fleeting guest in such troubled times.